2.3 Broader interpretations. While classical and modern definitions often centered on the state, government, and formal institutions, contemporary scholarship recognizes politics as a pervasive and multidimensional phenomenon. Politics does not stop at the gates of parliament or the borders of the nation-state. It permeates workplaces, families, identities, and cultural practices. Indeed, one of the most important intellectual shifts of the late 20th and early 21st centuries has been the recognition that politics extends into areas once thought of as private or apolitical. This expansion reflects both empirical realities such as the globalization of economies and cultures and normative insights, particularly from critical theories that highlight the ways in which power circulates through everyday life. Identity politics. In recent decades, politics has increasingly centered on struggles over identity: race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, religion, and nationality. Identity politics refers to mobilizations rooted in the assertion of marginalized identities, responding to the failure of traditional frameworks to address systemic inequalities. Movements such as the U.S. civil rights struggle, feminism, indigenous rights campaigns, LGBTQ liberation, Black Lives Matter, and Me Too have redefined what counts as political, linking law and policy to recognition, dignity, and belonging. Theorists like Charles Taylor and Axel Honneth argue that recognition is a basic human need, making its denial a form of oppression. Identity politics also challenges dominant narratives, whether through removing colonial statues or decolonizing curricula, and disrupts the liberal divide between public and private by declaring the personal is political. While criticized for risks of fragmentation or essentialism, it has expanded politics to include questions of culture, identity, and justice. Corporate and workplace politics. Politics also unfolds in workplaces and organizations, often referred to as organizational or corporate politics. While the term office politics is sometimes used pejoratively, it points to the reality that organizations are sites of negotiation, competition, and informal power struggles. Decisions about promotions, access to resources, leadership succession, and organizational culture frequently involve behind-the-scenes maneuvering as much as formal criteria, such as performance metrics. Sociologists and management scholars have long emphasized that workplaces mirror broader political and social dynamics. Corporate hierarchies often reproduce inequalities related to class, gender, and race, reinforcing systemic patterns of privilege and exclusion. For example, the persistent glass ceiling faced by women and minorities illustrates how informal networks and cultural biases shape professional opportunities. At the same time, labor unions and employee associations introduce an explicitly political dimension as they collectively bargain for wages, working conditions, and benefits, sometimes in direct opposition to managerial priorities. Beyond the organizational level, multinational corporations increasingly act as global political actors. Their decisions shape international trade flows, influence governments through lobbying, and set norms in areas such as environmental sustainability, labor rights, and digital privacy. Corporate campaigns addressing climate change or controversies over tech. Companies' use of personal data show how business practices have far-reaching social and political consequences. The growing prominence of corporate social responsibility, CSR, and environmental, social, and governance ESG standards underscores that corporate decision-making is never neutral but deeply political, with outcomes that affect not only employees, but also communities, ecosystems, and global governance structures. Family and interpersonal dynamics. Even intimate spaces such as families exhibit political dynamics. Decisions about authority, the division of household labor, caregiving responsibilities, and inheritance all involve negotiations of power and values. For much of history, the family was considered a private sphere distinct from politics. However, feminist theorists in the late 20th century challenged this boundary, with the assertion that the personal is political, showing that domestic arrangements are deeply shaped by wider social structures such as patriarchy, economic systems, and cultural norms. For example, debates over parental leave policies, childcare provision, and reproductive rights reveal how the family is tied to public policies and state regulation. Domestic violence legislation and marriage laws likewise demonstrate that the state plays a critical role in defining family relations. These issues highlight that families are not isolated units but microcosms, where broader struggles over gender, authority, and justice are enacted. Interpersonal relationships outside the family also display political dimensions. Friendships, romantic partnerships, and community ties involve ongoing negotiations over influence, recognition, and compromise. Power imbalances, even when subtle, shape how people interact and whose voices carry weight. Thus, whether in intimate households or everyday social interactions, politics permeates the most personal domains, reinforcing the idea that coexistence always involves the negotiation of power and values. Cultural politics. Culture expressed through media, art, religion, language, and education serves as a vital arena of politics. Unlike formal institutions of government, cultural politics operates through symbols, narratives, and representations that shape how people understand themselves and others. At its core, cultural politics asks who has the authority to define meaning, whose voices are amplified, and which perspectives are silenced. One prominent example is the debate over media representation. The underrepresentation of minority groups in film and television, or their portrayal through stereotypes, has long been recognized as a political issue because representation influences social attitudes, self-perception, and access to power. Campaigns such as Oscars So White highlight how cultural institutions both reflect and reinforce structural inequalities. Similarly, digital platforms like Twitter or TikTok have become sites of political contestation, where marginalized voices can challenge dominant narratives, but also face censorship or algorithmic bias. Language politics provides another vivid illustration. Decisions about which languages are taught in schools, used in government, or recognized as official are never neutral. Struggles over bilingual education in the United States, the preservation of indigenous languages in Canada or Australia, or the dominance of English as a global lingua franca reveal how language both empowers and excludes. Language policies can affirm identity and belonging, or, conversely, marginalize entire communities. Education, too, is a powerful site of cultural politics. Disputes over school curricula, whether about teaching evolution, colonial history, or gender diversity, reflect deeper conflicts about collective memory and societal values. Efforts to decolonize education seek to challenge Eurocentric frameworks and recognize diverse forms of knowledge. Similarly, controversies over the banning of books or the inclusion of LGBTQ content in schools show how education shapes cultural legitimacy. Artistic and religious expressions also become politicized. Governments censor films, literature, or art that challenge official ideologies, while artists and writers use cultural production to resist authoritarianism and imagine alternative futures. Religious symbols, from the wearing of hijabs to displays of Christian crosses in public spaces, often spark political debates about identity, secularism, and pluralism. Cultural politics underscores that what people read, watch, speak, and believe is never merely personal or aesthetic. It is profoundly political. Control over cultural narratives translates into power, shaping public opinion, legitimizing authority, and influencing social change. Thus, culture is not peripheral but central to politics, operating as a battleground where struggles over identity, recognition, and justice are fought. Conclusion: the definitions of politics span a wide spectrum, from classical ideals of justice and virtue to modern analyses of power, authority, and distribution, and finally, to broader interpretations that emphasize identity, culture, and everyday life. This multiplicity reflects the complexity of politics itself. It is simultaneously normative and empirical, local and global, formal and informal. Understanding politics requires integrating these perspectives, rather than choosing one over the other. Aristotle reminds us that politics aims at human flourishing. Plato underscores the need for wisdom, and justice. Laswell and Easton provide tools to analyze how resources and values are distributed. Weber highlights the centrality of the state and power, while broader approaches show how politics permeates identity, culture, and daily interactions. Ultimately, politics cannot be reduced to elections or legislatures alone. It is the fabric of human coexistence, shaping how we live together, how we negotiate differences, and how we pursue justice and the good life.